Let's check in with Joseph Lindsley in Ukraine. Joseph, I don't know if you've heard about this. Since July, an unknown Russian group has been buying and doctoring cameos from celebrities, including Mike Tyson, Elijah Wood, and others. And apparently, unbeknownst to the celebrities, their customized messages have been manipulated to appear to endorse the Kremlin peddled false claim that Ukrainian President Zelensky suffers from drug and alcohol abuse. Have you heard anything about this?
Joe. Little fucking Joe Lindsley.
Joe Lindsley is quickly becoming an American treasure in broadcasting.
Welcome to Ukraine Bank.
I did. I mean, at least we have some comic relief to laugh at the absurdity. But they, through this cameo business, they asked celebrities to address someone named Vladimir, and without further details. And this is, this is sort of humorous and bizarre. But if you look at, Russians are, and they've been doing this since before their full-scale invasion, but especially now that Russia is struggling they've struggled to take Ukraine. They're not able to attack Ukrainian infrastructure as they did last year, and so they have to resort to propaganda tactics. And we've seen this very deeply here. Whenever you get the strange communication or new communication, or even if you meet, you have, say, an American, a so-called American volunteer shows up in Lviv. Everyone has to vet you to be very careful to make sure these people are who they say they are. And that's not only here in Ukraine, but the whole world, because of our interconnectability, is a theater of this war. And so anyone can be susceptible to Russian propaganda. Meanwhile, 10 years ago today, December 8th, in Kyiv, Kyiv at that time was controlled by pro-Putin puppets. There really was not a lot of freedom here. And more than 400,000 people, up to 800,000 over the course of that weekend 10 years ago today, swelled into the Maidan, the main square of Kyiv. They were protesting because weeks before, groups of students had been standing in favor of more cooperation with Europe, with getting away from the Russian grip. And the secret police at the time had fired upon the students. And so it really was awakening this huge movement of the people. And so this weekend, 10 years ago today, was a very dramatic turn in Ukraine's stand for freedom. And we can talk about it on Monday, because on Monday is the anniversary of how the secret police responded at the time during that crucial winter. Without those protests, there would be no war today, because Russia would control Ukraine in totality. And then meanwhile, we had through the night and in the early morning, Russia launched missiles upon Ukraine. At around probably about 3 o'clock in the morning, they sent several missiles to the city of Kharkiv. Kharkiv is just 30 miles from Russia. So those missiles, the first ones arrive before the air alarms can sound. And in Kharkiv, they hit apartment buildings, private houses. They hit a shopping center. They hit really in the center of the city. So once again, another heinous attack there in the city of Kharkiv. People, it was serious enough that people went to the metro stations at 2 o'clock in the morning. Even though there's curfew, when there is an attack, you can run to the subway for protection. And by the way, I just saw pictures from the subway stations. In Kharkiv, they've installed schools during the daytime, schools in the subway system. They have these sort of glass pods, which is the regular schoolhouse now, just because there's always alarms and always the threat of attack. And as people in Kharkiv, they're frustrated every time this happens. And one major frustration is, some of these missiles are launched from the Russian city of Belgorod, which is just about 50 miles or so away from Kharkiv. But Ukrainians are restricted. They're not able to attack. We think of all the pressure on Israel as Israel's attacking Gaza in order to root out Hamas. Ukrainians, per their agreements with the weapons they've received from the West, they're not allowed just to attack anything on Russian soil, including the Russian bases from which Russia launches these missiles. And so they're incredibly vulnerable, and they're forced to be restrained and just sort of sitting ducks. And then several hours later, between 6 and 8 a.m., the Russians sent missiles to Kyiv, which has become an unusual event. That has not happened very much in the way it did a year ago. But all of the missiles that were sent toward Kyiv were intercepted before they could reach the city in the outskirts of the city. So still, we have no large-scale nationwide Russian missile attacks upon Ukraine. Infrastructure is protected, but especially in those frontline cities, you can be hit at any time, and there is some serious damage.
Joe, I'm told that you met with a member of Ukraine's parliament. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, so we started this podcast with the independent media in Kyiv, Ukrainska Pravda, Ukrainian Truth, and they're very brave journalists. They started when Ukraine was still under the thumb of Russia in the early 2000s, and so we started a podcast to share voices in English about the fight for freedom here. And so it was actually on Thanksgiving Day I interviewed Maria Mezentseva. She's a member of the Ukraine's parliament, which in Ukrainian language is the Verkhovna Rada, the High Council. And she's from Kharkiv city, that city that was just hit this morning. And she during this wartime, she's been traveling Europe, and she was just in the U.S. actually to tell the story of Ukraine. She's also working always to bring food and necessary items to her constituents. And one of her big missions, because so many people in her region, many parts of her region were occupied by the Russians up until September of 2022. And so one of her big missions is to help, find those who've been kidnapped or deported, especially children, and to hold Russians accountable for their war crimes. And so you can see the full conversation at UkrainianFreedomNews.com. And she's a great personality. She also talks very clearly about why the Ukrainians have sought to put restrictions on the Moscow church that's been operating here as an arm of the Russian government within Ukraine. But in this, I wanted to share a little clip where she talks about some personal experience. Even though she's in parliament, many Ukrainians have loved ones who are lost and missing in Russia. And as we think about, Hanukkah has begun, which is celebrated, of course, here in Ukraine, and thinking of those in Israel right now. But those attacks, when Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th, it really resonated for people here in Ukraine for two reasons: both the brutality of those attacks, which Ukrainians have seen in those frontline places, including in Kharkiv region, but also the fact that the Hamas took hostages. And what Deputy Mezentseva, Maria, told me in our conversation, that we must remember that there are still Ukrainians who've been held hostage since February of 2022. And so here's a little clip of our conversation.
It reminded us a flashback. We were like on the streets of Bucha back then, or the streets of Irpin, or the streets of Kupiansk, which is in Kharkiv region. And I don't think we should let it go, because this is also a story of my family. We have a missing person, and he's missing for more than since the beginning of the full scale. He's a teacher in a Ukrainian school. It happened at the temporary occupied territories, and I think I've opened up about it just this summer because I received so many requests from different Ukrainian families asking, what can we do? How can we search for them? How can we involve International Committee of the Red Cross, which receives a lot of funds from US, UK, European states, Australia, everywhere, for the humanitarian purposes like this, or to search for prisoners of war who are also Ukrainian soldiers, to conduct exchanges. But civilian cases are terribly odd in a way, we literally don't know where, for instance, our relative is. We hope he's alive, he's verified as alive, but these stories are rolling since 2014, and this insane pain which is brought by the illegal deportation of Ukrainian children, and we are extremely thankful to the people of America who are now hosting Ukrainian families, Ukrainian children.
That's really interesting, Joseph. And sadly, this is the only broadcast where you will hear about Ukrainian hostages.
Yeah, it's completely forgotten. Even we see, sometimes even already Israeli hostages are forgotten sometimes, but certainly the Ukrainians are. And it includes Muslims, Christians, and Jews who the Russians have taken, and especially children. And, another big story, but if you want to hear that whole interview, you can go to UkrainianFreedomNews.com and also hear a little bit about what it's like to be in the parliament during a time of martial law. She was one of the first, she was in Kyiv when the Russians invaded, Maria Mezentseva, and so they had to choose to vote for martial law in those early hours of the full-scale invasion. But also, Bob, another major story that is not told. I mean, by the way, I didn't see any headlines about the attack on Kharkiv city today. But we have, as you think about it, Christmas time in the States, people moving around and shipping things. There still is a massive blockade. Poland, Slovakia, and Hungary, trucks from those countries cannot get into Ukraine. Right now, we have reports that 3,300 trucks are stuck at the Polish-Ukrainian border due to protesters there, due to problems with the governments in those countries. And certainly, there's got to be the hand of Russia. But this is a very serious problem, preventing goods from getting drones and other important goods getting to Ukraine. And no one really is paying attention to this.
Important news. Joseph Lindsley in Ukraine, thank you for keeping us informed. To be continued.
Bob, thank you. And also, by the way, speaking of goods, we have some goods on the way to you, some gifts from our Ukrainian, Polish, and American volunteers to you guys at WGN. So those are not blockaded, and hopefully we'll be in Chicago soon.
Oh, we look forward to that. Thanks a lot, Joseph.
Thank you, Bob. Until Monday.
Thank you for introducing Ukraine on your social media pages. That's very important that much more people can get more information about the situation here and how everybody can help Ukraine to stay stronger and to save all the world.
Что он сказал?
Well, which side are you on?
На чьей ты стороне?
Come on now. Oh, which side are you on?
На чьей ты стороне?